Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm JJ Flazanes, your host. Thank you for downloading today's episode. First, I want to say thank you for those that supported last week's show on racism and the law of attraction. It was a scary show to create and put out, and I'm glad that I did. Have had a lot of positive feedback, and for those of you that don't agree, or if it was too much, or you think I wasn't as sensitive to the issue as I could have been, or I missed a bunch of things, hey, I tried, and I'm sorry, and maybe next time, if there's a next time, I'll be able to handle it better and address really all the concerns. So I just want to say thank you for your patience and understanding. I didn't get it right, but I did the best I could, so thank you for that. Because of last week's conversation, I reached out to Dr. Eben Alexander for another episode because I wanted to know his point of view on how he was handling what's been going on right now, from rioting and racism to, of course, COVID-19 and the pandemic. So we had a really great conversation the next day, which is what today's show is. Before we get into a little bit more about Dr. Eben Alexander, again, this is his third episode here on the show, I just want to remind you that today, if you're getting this episode when it airs for the first time, it is Tuesday, June 9th, and today is the last day and the last day ever to sign up for the Strengthening Intuition course that's live. If you're hearing this later and you're interested in the course, you can buy it because once we're done with it, it will be available to purchase and consume whenever you're ready, whenever that you want it. I will tell you that the price will probably go up because as I'm creating this course and as I'm seeing how I'm going to be delivering it, there's so much value that I think I underpriced it to begin with. So if you're interested in even just watching it in replay, it won't be lower than it is now, and it will be higher after tomorrow. Again, it's Strengthening Intuition. You can learn more about each week and what we're covering and more about it at jjflazanes.com/intuition. Again, jjflazanes.com/intuition. We are doing it live, but you don't need to come live. It can be recorded and you can do it from week to week with us, but it's the only time it will be done like this. And you have an opportunity to ask me questions live while we're doing it. So today's show, The Gifts of Desperation, came out of the conversation that I opened up with Dr. Eben and really had nowhere to go with it in terms of I had no predestination of what I wanted to cover except his advice, what he's been telling people, and to remind everyone of his experience literally on the other side, being in coma for 7 days and literally being on the other side. And so from that vantage point, from that perspective, because what I feel happens oftentimes is that we're acting from a myopic place of that if I die, I'm afraid of death and it's so super scary. And I'm not saying that that's not something to acknowledge, but when we talk to someone like Anita Moorjani or Dr. Eben Alexander, and they've been there and they can say, or Abraham, listening to Abraham, there's nothing to fear. So if we take the perspective that we're eternal beings and there's nothing to fear, how do we now look at what's going on right now? And what do we tell people who don't have that experience? And how do we guide them? So I appreciate that we just opened up the conversation and it went where it went. So Dr. Eben Alexander spent over 25 years as an academic neurosurgeon, including 15 years at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, the Children's Hospital, and Harvard Medical School in Boston. We talk a little bit about his NDE, and he was in coma for 7 days. His story is literally the perfect law of attraction story as far as I'm concerned. And then he came out and he wrote a book called Proof of Heaven, which was really his recalling of his experience and what he learned. Since Proof of Heaven was released in 2012, he's been a guest on The Dr. Oz Show, Super Soul Sunday with Oprah Winfrey, ABC TV 2020, Good Morning America, Fox TV, Fox and Friends, and his story has been featured on the Discovery Channel and the Biography Channel. He's been interviewed for over 400 national and international radio and internet programs and podcasts. His books are available in over 40 countries and have been translated into over 30 different languages. If you haven't read Proof of Heaven, now is the time. It's the first book I started with. It's so beautiful. It's so inspiring. Yes, Living in a Mindful Universe is also a great book on the science of consciousness and what we're talking about. But just to get started, Proof of Heaven is a must read. You can find out more information at ebenalexander.com, but we're going to share with you a lot more information today. Welcome everyone to the show. If you're watching this on YouTube, I have the distinct pleasure once again. Episode number 3, I have Dr. Eben Alexander with us, and I'm very excited to bring him back and have this conversation about what's going on in the world today and how to look at it from another perspective, not invalidating anyone else's perspective, but to recognize that there are many levels in which we can view something and how we can approach making things better and creating positive change. If you're listening to this on the podcast, or if you want to listen to this on the podcast, there'll be a different intro, and we'll go through all of the different accolades that Dr. Alexander has up to this date with his 3 books and everything he's been through. You'll hear all about that. So go ahead and listen to the link below if you want to take this interview with you and not have to watch it on video. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Alexander.
Well, JJ, it's great to be back on. Thanks so much for having me back again.
Well, I appreciate everything you've been through, everything that you teach, everything that you're about. And when I was stuck here in this pandemic and thinking about all of the advice I was trying to give and be of service in some way, I had Dr. Christian Northrup on the show, and we opened Pandora's box, if you will, about some of the things that maybe, I'm not sure what your perspective or point of view is on when it comes to sort of the healthcare industry and what's going on, pandemic. We don't have to go down that path, but what I wanted to reach out and ask you about, because, you know, one of the unique gifts that we have in you is what happened when you crossed over. And I know we haven't really got into that much because it's in the book. And I've, just take into this assumption that people have seen your interview on Super Soul Sunday or somewhere else where you've talked about your NDE. But I'd love to start with just a quick explanation of the fact that you have experienced something that many people haven't. You've literally crossed over. You've literally died in a way and had a unique perspective. Can we talk a little bit about that to start?
Absolutely. That's a beautiful place to start, because essentially that's one of the most important messages of near-death experiences is that we're much more than our physical bodies, and that our existence involves a lot more than just a physical lifetime in a physical body. And when you get to the evidence for reincarnation and afterlife, after-death communications, all these things are really just showing us that consciousness is a much bigger entity than something you can pretend is created by a physical brain and is limited only to this lifetime. And that's where I think the lessons of NDEs become especially profound, because it's really about how to live these lives in the here and now in this material realm more than anything else. It's not just about, it's reassuring to know that my conscious awareness doesn't come grinding to a halt when my body and brain die. But then where do we go with all that? And how do we use that kind of information in living our lives? And that's where I think all of this starts to get far more informative and powerful in guiding us in our choices.
Let's talk about the feeling. We're in a situation in several aspects of life where there's a lot of negative feelings. We are ingrained right now with whether it be internally that we're having it because we have an issue with what's going on. We're feeling a lack of freedom, we're feeling fear of our future, or we're being told we should be afraid, right? So the messages we're getting aren't really helping us find our intuitive centered place of trust and belief and surrender and guidance. I'm not speaking personally. I'm trying to collectively give an overview, because that isn't how I've been feeling for most of the time. Now, I have definitely been knocked off my internal knowingness at some point when I felt like the future might bring something that I am being forced to do that I don't agree with, and that my intuition says this is not right on any level, and I don't care if everybody else does it, but don't tell me I have to do it. So in those instances, what would you say about the feelings that you got, the change in you, the awareness that you had, the knowing, the truth that you found out, if you will, when you literally you were in a coma for, what was it, 5 days or 7 days?
7 days. 7 days in coma.
7 days in coma. Doctors thought you weren't going to make it. You'd be brain dead when you got out of it, if you got out of it, which they didn't think you would. And then, and you're on the other side. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think, to me, one of the most valuable lessons of my experience, and this certainly involves so many other similar stories of an amazing universe that reveals itself when the brain and body die. One of the most important things to remember is that our dominant worldview, which is pretty much hosted by scientific materialism, is at its very heart a very bleak message. That our existence is birth to death and nothing more, that when the brain and body die, that's the end of our existence. In fact, that materialist science would try and tell you do not have free will. They would tell you that it's all, consciousness is nothing more than chemical reactions and electron fluxes in the substance of the brain that give us this illusion of awareness. And all of that is just flat out wrong. And it's a very bleak perspective. And yet, those kind of profound, kind of false assumptions of our society lead to a tremendous amount of angst in the face of challenges like the COVID pandemic. We're being asked to stay apart from each other physically when humans naturally crave touch and companionship and togetherness. I mean, the most natural part of our existence is our relationships with others. In fact, I would go so far as to say the whole universe exists for those relationships to lead to learning and teaching that allows us to grow, that allows for all of consciousness to grow. And yet, that dominant worldview of materialism preaches separatism. It basically says this is all material stuff. It's following the laws of physics that govern the material world. There's nothing else to it. Pay it no mind. That's essentially what our culture is asked to believe. And in the midst of the pandemic, that can be very unsettling. It's refreshing to find that this emerging worldview that really takes a radical new look at consciousness and what it is, and in many ways comes to the same conclusions that spiritual traditions have reached for thousands of years about our oneness, about our connectedness, about the power of love and compassion and kindness. These are all crucial things to recover in the current era, and yet they're not a natural part of our kind of societal beliefs. So I think it's, from my point of view, all of this in many ways is as it should be, because the challenges that we face now, especially with the COVID pandemic and a lot of what it's forced on us with shutdown of our economic systems and kind of a global reach, in many ways is demanding that we kind of up our game in terms of how we see ourselves and what we see as our kind of unfolding reality. What is our kind of higher soul will for how we will manage this catastrophe of the pandemic? And likewise, we now have a very major wrinkle thrown into the works. And again, I think none of this is an accident. I think that all of these apparent hardships, just like hardships in general, in many ways mark a pathway forward. And it's how we deal with those hardships. And if we can recover a sense of love of the universe for us and a sense of connectedness to other beings, in the midst of all this, we can actually use that as a tremendous strength to be here. I mean, the COVID pandemic in particular has revealed tremendous shortcomings and problems in the infrastructure of our society globally. Not just here in the U.S., where we like to pride ourselves in being the biggest economy on earth, and yet so much of our modern presentation of our government and of our basically our kind of way of presenting as a society is nothing to be proud of. And I think it's time to really return to our roots and start using these challenges like the COVID pandemic and this whole second phase of angst, which has to do with police prejudice and racial bigotry among the power sources of our world. When the police express bigotry, when they can willfully, in front of cameras and without compunction, snuff out the life of an American citizen, George Floyd in Minneapolis, these are times that demand our response. And it is no longer possible to accept that kind of behavior will be tolerated moving forward. The world has had enough. We're all in this together. This is really about the common man. We're all in this together. We're here to support each other. And to the best extent possible, our government and all of its major arms of kind of activity, including our judicial system and law enforcement, really need to get in line with the wishes of the people. And I think what we're seeing in response to the murder of George Floyd around the world, not just in big U.S. cities, but literally around the world, many other cities, groups are marching in solidarity with the humans involved in this extraordinary adventure of ours. And it is time for our government to get on board. I must say, I have been very heartened with a lot of the protests, a lot of the news that I've seen in the last day or so, what I find is that police chiefs and that police officers are taking a knee. They are joining arms in solidarity with the protesters, and it's because we are all human. We're all in this together, and there is this kind of overlying sense of maybe some action of our government which gets out soldiers that use tear gas and rubber bullets and pepper spray to bring misery into the lives of peaceful demonstrators. Now, I do agree that the looting is wrong. There really should be no looting in any of this. And that's a horrible tragedy because it completely dishonors the memory of George Floyd. But the peaceful demonstrations, which is what Floyd's family are calling for, and what many around this country are supporting, are also being supported by many of the police who take a knee. And to me, this is a very heartwarming and kind of soul-affirming lesson from the current era. And it is really time for all of us to realize that oppression by authoritarian governments does not represent the will of the people. And it is time for all of us to really stand up for love, for compassion, for kindness, mercy, acceptance, and when necessary, forgiveness. But we're all in this together. The very weak and shoddy safety net that we have in the United States for the less fortunate, the economically underprivileged, is really horrific. And the COVID pandemic has revealed these major shortcomings in a society that many of us think should be a beacon of hope and a promise for the rest of the world. And yet that is not what, in the current era, I think we are presenting. And in many ways, I would say that the COVID pandemic and all of the extreme social unrest supporting the rights of all people not to be prejudiced and attacked by the police and by the power structures, the military. I mean, this is outrageous that the people are actually being demonized and attacked by these agencies of the corporate and government structure. And it's really high time that we rose up against this. I don't think that ultimately that humanity and their greatest sensibilities believe that this is really the pathway forward. And in many ways, as Karen and I often present in our meditation events, this is really about this lovely awakening of the soul that reveals we're all in this together. I mean, that's the most common message from near-death experiences and from the modern scientific study of consciousness, I might add, is the oneness, the one mind that we're all really sharing. And in so many ways, the near-death experience with its life review, which goes back thousands of years, independent of culture, that your life flashing before your eyes is a beautiful example of how the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the very fabric of the universe. Because in the life review, you go through those crucial residual lessons of your life in a very real kind of living of those events, of teachings both good and bad about your kind of soul growth. And if you've been busy handing out pain and suffering to others, the life review may not be very pleasant, because in the life review, you become the recipient of your behaviors. It's kind of like turning the other cheek, but because you actually are the victim of your own kind of aggressions. And in many ways, the life review is very neutral in how it presents all this. But given that most of us would like to be treated kindly, when our life review shows us that our own actions and thoughts in life, we're not necessarily treating others kindly, it can be a very harsh realization, especially in the light and love of that beautiful, infinitely loving and healing environment in which those lessons are given. So we often talk about the gift of desperation that is so apparent, say, in alcoholism and addiction. And addiction is not just about drug addiction, but addiction to work, addiction to sex, to love, to workouts, to addiction to all kinds of behaviors that can really wreck the rest of our life. But addictions always involve kind of a bottom, the opportunity to have things get so bad that you can make a choice to let those addictive behaviors go and kind of rejoin your soul mission and growth, or you can go on to die from it. Unfortunately, many addictions are deadly. And that's exactly what happens. And Karen and I love to point out in our current meditation experiences with people that that gift of desperation is something that's offered to our entire culture in the form of the COVID pandemic and in the form of the police brutality and the George Floyd murder, and how we're having to really rise to the occasion to deal with all that. These gifts of desperation can be tremendous energizers of growth. And I think that is the thing not to forget, and to take that bigger view where we don't necessarily just kind of fall into a victim mentality and kind of a helpless mode of, well, the whole world is falling apart, but in fact start to see ourselves as powerful change agents that can bring love and compassion and kindness to this world. And it's just, from my point of view, it's just a much healthier way to look at the challenge like what's facing this world today and try and use that to energize growth and harmony and bringing some peace and prosperity and sharing gifts with the world to help bring comfort into a world that at this point in time is extremely troubled and challenged, especially with the economic fallout from the COVID pandemic. And then over the top of it all with the police brutality and the murder of George Floyd, and how that basically implies all of us must get involved in trying to make this world a better place.
You know, on Saturday night, it was pretty heavy here for us in the house, and we watched a movie. I decided we were going to watch Mr. Rogers, and the Mr. Rogers movie with Tom Hanks, which was so good. We watched a lot of Madam Secretary, but it often depresses me just to kind of get in the weeds with what's going on with the government, and I don't believe half the stuff that's on there anyway. So it's not a happy show to watch if you think that any of this is real and that it was almost a Cold War every single day and a nuclear war every day. I'm like, I'm not going to watch that. So we watched Mr. Rogers, which was so appropriate. In the, everyone is unique, everyone is special, everyone has feelings, everyone needs to deal with their feelings and express their feelings and be seen and heard for who they are and what they're feeling. Move into my audience asking for help and guidance in their anger, in dealing with their anger, and doing the best I could to address to honor where everybody is, and to also focus on the goal. Like you're talking about gifts of desperation, focus on the goal here of the contrast that's been created, this immense amount of energy and focus that we now have, and what do we do with it? And I believe that the part of ourselves that wants to react, retaliate, come from the place of I was feeling oppressed, which is a terrible, depressive, powerless place to be, to anger, which feels better in the moment, to get angry and to do something about it. But staying in that anger feels destructive and not useful for where we ultimately can take this conversation. And so I had invited everybody to come to Agape on Sunday morning to do Agape Live, because I knew Reverend Michael would to deal with this in a way that would encompass all of that. So I was out there sort of trying to gather, what do we do about this from different points of view? I did a show, took a big risk. Already had the hate mail about racism and the law of attraction, because I understand there's just people who are suffering so deeply with wounds that they have carried and feel so disempowered in so many ways that any talk of anything about love is not what they want to hear right now. And so that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you about, and not in a way of having to address somebody who isn't wanting to hear this, but what is it that you are telling people? Because again, there's this take action, but come from love, take action, but come from love. And so what do you say to the people who are like, but no, love isn't working? What do you say to those people?
Well, I think love always does work in the end, and it can be very, very toxic to get just totally buy into the conflict and the us versus them mentality. For me, I use meditation a lot to get closer to kind of a deep heart resonant and truth about all this. And in that meditation, I'm always looking for the win-win situation. I'm always working with the higher soul to higher soul communication that I believe allows us to rise above the petty interests of the ego to facilitate the kind of change we want to bring to the world. When you lose track of the role of love and that we're all in this together and that we're really here to help each other, that's when things can really go off the rails. And I would encourage people, to try and keep that in mind. I mean, one thing that was apparent to me when I came back from my near-death experience was I came to realize that people who I had seen before my coma as my nemesis, as an enemy, as someone who wanted to prevent me from getting something I wanted in life, what I saw very clearly in my near-death experience was that those people were always near and dear soul mates. That in fact, we were trying to teach each other very challenging and difficult lessons. And from that little kind of low level kind of view of the ego, from that perspective, often it's just like, oh, we're against each other, we're fighting each other, we're in conflict, I must overpower them, I must dominate them. That was a word used from the White House yesterday about the protesters, was to dominate them. And from my point of view, that really doesn't lead anywhere useful. And it's much more, I mean, the old concept of praying for your enemy, I think, brings something very real to the table here. Prayer is a beautiful way of bringing the highest good to all involved, and not necessarily devolving into some kind of conflict and it's us versus them mentality. But in so many ways, I see that kind of mindset helps me a lot in dealing with this, and not to kind of succumb to that crazy making that this kind of seemingly endless conflict and kind of in continually enhancing polarization that seems to have no end to it. And the reason is it has no end. Just like addiction. Addiction is basically trying to pour material stuff into a spiritual hole in our soul. And it doesn't work. You've got to fix it with spiritual stuff. And I'd say likewise in this kind of a conflict, if you think that we're polarized and then more and more polarization, and the politicians seem to be driving us more and more against each other as if more polarization is the answer, but all it seems to do is make things much, much worse. And plus there seems to be no end in sight. And the reason is the answers lie in the middle. It's the middle ground, and this insane kind of focus on polarization is only going to do one thing, and that's going to make people crazier and crazier by driving us even further apart, where all the big answers are going to lie with compromise, with win-win situations, with bipartisan approaches to fixing the problems. And I think that these tremendous hardships that we're facing in the world today are showing us very clearly we need to meet in the middle and find common ground, and quit playing like this is some game of polarization where the dualities in life are all the opposites. And there's so much about our modern culture that tries to foment the kind of energizing power of the dualities and going for the poles, but it's never going to lead to any kind of harmony or solution. And so in essence, we really need to take a different mindset. And when it comes to prayer, praying for, a quote enemy is really praying for all of us to come to that higher ground, that kind of common ground where we know that we have many kind of desires as human beings in common with each other. And we know from looking at this world at large that there is an abundance. It's amazing, this kind of lack that is built into this kind of separatist ideology that emerges from materialist science, that there's never enough. And basically all that has its roots in kind of a twisted and distorted version of Darwinian evolution that got going in the late 19th and then the 20th century, that competition was what ruled all engagements. And that was misinterpreted in biology and then was incorporated, say, in economic systems, where people started thinking with that kind of survivalism was written into the economy, and that there was not enough to go around, and that therefore you had to have this kind of class warfare. Well, none of that is true. I believe that we can take a much bigger view of this that acknowledges our commonalities and how we can help each other, that can take the energy of all the kind of apparent darkness of the COVID pandemic and the economic shutdown, and start to turn some of that energy into healing and into working to help each other, and to seek a common ground in finding our answers and our pathway forward. I believe that the COVID pandemic in many ways can be a great gift to this world. It's exposed the horrific problems in our healthcare system, certainly in the United States, where we spend more money on healthcare than any other country, and yet we really do not have the excellent healthcare system that you would expect to show for all that. In many ways, our healthcare system is very lacking, and we're finding that out in spades in this COVID pandemic, where the U.S. Is going to end up with the worst caseload and the worst fatality rate, and that doesn't come from being a smart, intelligent country with a good healthcare system. It comes from a very mismanaged, distorted response at the very tip top of our levels of government that has flip-flopped day to day in their recommendations to the American people. It's high time we paid attention to the science and to the real experts and take those political lackeys out of there. They don't belong, in the CDC. They don't belong in the NIH. They don't belong in the FDA, DEA. I mean, the political hacks can really wreck things if we need science to guide the way. And I think probably one of the biggest lessons we've all learned from this is you cannot elect authoritarians who demonize science and have them be leaders of any countries, because in this modern world, that is far too dangerous. We have pandemics, we have nuclear weapons, we have all kinds of things that can make life miserable on this planet if we don't take care and do the right things. And it involves a scientific lead. And I know some people are a little paranoid that, the scientists aren't necessarily holding us in their best interest. And certainly if you look at the history of the 20th century, that's true. The chemists committed their sins in World War I with the development of machine guns, poisonous gases, and explosives. The physicists committed their sins in World War II with the invention of nuclear weapons. And one thing I'm sure of is if we ever have a World War III, World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. I'm paraphrasing a quote from Einstein there, but to me, it's a very important to get it. We now have the power to destroy all of civilization, to commit planetary suicide. And that's all the more reason not to keep following this insane pathway of destruction that also includes our addiction to fossil fuels and climate change, and the fact that we now have a gyre of plastic twice the size of the state of Texas rotating around in the Pacific Ocean, killing off animals by the hundreds of millions. I mean, this modern Homo sapiens, sapiens means wise, and we are doing anything but living up to the name of being Homo sapiens in the current era. And I believe that the COVID pandemic and especially the real big gorilla in the room, climate change, is all about an absolutely essential shift in human thinking and in our civilization towards a far more harmonious and peaceful way of looking at resources and development and how we use science and how we treat each other in moving forward. And that's where I think the kind of darkness of the pandemic in many ways can present a silver lining that can help us to emerge from this pandemic much stronger than we were before.
I think in any situation, there's what we can acknowledge that it's created, that it's identified, that it's uncovered for us to look at. And there are so many positives, one being some of those planetary changes, more clean waters and things that have happened along the earth, the sky and the clearness and the pollution and things as we have been staying at home. But I want to talk about, because I think without a broader perspective, one is only looking at the discomfort of the now. And one of the things that, having your perspective of literally crossing over, being over there, having a different point of view. I pulled out Living in a Mindful Universe today as a little bit of preparation, and I was going over chapter 13, Learning Our Soul Lessons. There are people in my community who they're attracted to the energy of hope, of happiness. In fact, I had someone sign up last week to work with me who said, I don't know any really happy people. I was like, oh, and I know that's part of the energetic pull of what's possible and what I'm looking for that I don't know where to find. And so some of the concepts that I'm teaching or having people share are new to a lot of people. Not everybody, but a certain number of people are not necessarily in belief of past lives or reincarnation, or that this is a choice. And I usually break it down into what I think is we really only have two choices. We have a decision, in my opinion. Now you can change those choices from moment to moment, from situation, but generally it's, I believe everything is working out for me, and that I have a role in whatever's going on for a reason, that I've incarnated in this lifetime, in this time and space for a reason, with contracts with a lot of people to make evolution and expansion happen for consciousness and for eternity and for the universe. Or I'm a victim of just random things happening. It's not my fault. I'm not involved. And if we take the role of I'm not involved. I didn't do this. I didn't create this. I have no part in this. That is kind of a victim position, which doesn't give you any power, and which will always sort of lead to wanting and needing other people to change or circumstances to change in order for you to feel empowered or feel purposeful or feel pushed or pulled into a direction of action that is right for you to really live and embody what's happening right now. It's like leverage what's going on. So can we speak to a little bit, and then I want to get into your advice, like your literal advice about what to do or what not to do for people who are in all different phases of what's going on right now. Because again, I took this leap yesterday of doing this show on racism and law of attraction, fully well knowing that I was going to get hate mail and feedback of people that were going to say whatever they're going to say. And I acknowledge that. But I couldn't stay silent any longer. I'm staying silent because as a white woman, I didn't know what to say. I was uncomfortable saying anything because some people are going to look to it and say, well, that's supportive. And some people are going to say, well, you're just feeling guilty and that's why you're doing it, or you have no idea. It's just such a touchy place to be. It's an uncomfortable place for everybody to be, but it's an opportunity. And I don't want us to miss this opportunity. And I don't want us to miss to recreate, because we're stuck in the negative emotions, to keep recreating what's been happening by having the same freaking conversation that doesn't get anybody anywhere. So I'd like to take this opportunity to make the change. So two things. One, reincarnation, life lessons, sacred contracts. We're here for a reason. We chose this. We chose to be in this for a reason. And then what to do about it.
But you're bringing up some beautiful and interesting points here, because it's extremely uncomfortable to feel like you are a victim of circumstance, that you have no power over the events in your life. I mean, basically that's becoming a prisoner locked up in a prison, where other people have all the say in everything you do in your daily life, and you have no say whatsoever. And I think one of the most beautiful gifts of my journey, of my NDE, and of the 11 years since then of trying to make sense of it all, has been this recovery of a very profound sense of free will, of being an agent in the events unfolding in my life. And I think that can be especially valuable when you're facing challenges like we have globally today with the COVID pandemic and the the economic shutdown. This is really kind of an unprecedented challenge to our lives. And if you feel at this time that there's nothing you can do to kind of improve your circumstance or to live your purpose, that can be a very depressing kind of thing to face. And yet I do not believe that is the reality. And in fact, I would say that this kind of a global challenge, with so many kind of restrictions being laid on us from the world at large, with this pandemic and the governmental responses to it, which include a vast shutdown of economic systems and tremendous increases in poverty, in hunger, in a real lack. I believe that is where we can actually rise up and start to manifest and take action to start helping the least and the last and the lost, and to start using kind of meditative experience and centering prayer to help unify the world, and to help some of the lessons that we can glean in those meditative states or in prayers for humanity. We can start using some of those lessons to kind of help inform our choices about how to work with this world to help out the least, the last, and the lost, to step up to the plate in this time of challenge, when so many who used to be really marginal and on the edge, kind of at the bottom of our socioeconomic ladder, have now really been cast off. And this is the time to really take greater action about all of that, and to help in food banks, to support those who are economically less favored in this current challenge. And I think that is where we start to find our real purpose in life. So many throughout history have come to realize the power of helping others and showing love for others, especially if you're kind of circling the drain with any kind of self-pity and worried about the events of this world and how unfair they are to me as the individual. Well, get out of that funk by helping others, by really trying to glean those deep lessons and go out into this world to make a difference for others. And it can be something as simple as a smile and simple acts of random kindness to strangers. But really, we're all in this together, and this is a perfect time to start showing harmony, start showing care for others, and really taking care of each other. And I believe that is the kind of thing that will get us out of this. And you hear more and more stories in the news. This is one thing that Karen often harps on is, for example, in hurricane coverage, how, yes, it's distressing to see people's lives, their homes ruined by a natural disaster like a hurricane or fires or tornadoes or what have you. But then what we often see in this current era is neighbors helping neighbors and people helping each other. And it's showing us really the best of humanity, which I believe is kind of our natural basis. And I believe is far more of a constituent of our society than those occasional bad actors who take advantage of say, a natural disaster to scam other people and to take advantage of other people. Whereas most of what I see, and I think luckily the news presents a lot of this, is the goodwill and the benevolence and people helping other people who are in deep trouble. In so many ways, the darkness and apparent evil of this world can help show the brightest silver lining of human spirit and of connectivity and kind of our one mind, our sharing of the one mind to be here for each other.
I spent a lot of time before I recorded my show with a guest who was a Black businesswoman and had stepped out to say, I don't feel oppressed, and I want you all to stop telling me I should feel oppressed, because I don't and never have, and I'm not going to. Not necessarily disrespecting others or not trying to disrespect others, but by being an example of taking her own power back and using the laws in which she understands to thrive and to just live in a world for her. Like she cited Michelle Obama, some child asking Michelle Obama, well, how did you do that if you felt like this? And I think Michelle Obama's response was, I've never felt oppressed. And so knowing that, again, coming into this situation, I watched a lot of looking for evidence of, because I think we get so overly focused and extra dramatized in our news, which is why I don't watch the news, but even, so bombarded on social media about all the things that make you angry, all of the injustices, all of the things that are wrong, which need to be seen, but disproportionate to then what happens, like you just said, like all of the positive things that are happening. You just gave me a great idea of asking people to maybe later on this week post pictures. I was looking for, where is it working? And I was finding people sharing, the hugging of cops and Black men on the front lines, and of people and of the cops taking a knee, and of supporting and standing behind. And I was just finding, positive things that were like, okay, see, this is proof that it is going to change, that we are in that space, and that's what's needed to happen. On an individual level, though, besides tuning into the things and finding the evidence, looking for the evidence of what is working and how things are shifting, and not just putting our focus on what isn't and continuing that conversation, but balancing it out with acknowledging and looking for evidence of positive movement and change forward. Right. What would be, or what has been, your advice per person individually, besides, of course, helping others, being of service to others? What can someone do that you would recommend, or that you've been telling people, on any level, from COVID to financial stuff to racism? What does the individual's responsibility in terms of what I can do for me that helps everybody?
Well, I think an important thing to point out here is our news sources have it used to be you could depend on the evening news, for example, to really present a fairly factual accounting of what had happened that day. Before Ronald Reagan, there actually were laws in place that had to do with fairness in reporting. And unfortunately, that's been lost from our world. So that leaves us as individuals very responsible for getting our news from multiple sources. And this is something, again, I would credit my life partner, Karen Newell, with educating me about this. Because I was very used to following, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, some pretty standard news sources and trusting them and depending on them. But what she has shown me very clearly is you really need to look at other sources, and you need to go outside of your little comfort base. And so I will look at Fox News and Breitbart and other sources, because it's important for us to see how these various news entities are presenting the facts, because the facts obviously are not really agreed upon. And it's gotten to a point where you almost can't trust any of them to present you with a completely objective set of facts. Some are better than others. Some are very clearly uninterested in doing anything other than serving as propaganda arms. So you need to recognize that. And then, of course, there's that other danger of social media, because the problem with social media is it's all about making money and getting ad clicks. And so what they want is people to click, and what they find is people will click more and more on the kind of stuff that aligns with their thinking. And so it's kind of like social media becomes like an echo chamber, so that whatever you're believing, you're going to believe a lot more strongly after a lot of clicking around in social media. And of course, that doesn't mean you're getting closer to the truth at all. All it does is it means you're a pawn. You're being used by the social media companies. You're not their customer. Their customer are the advertisers. Those are the people who are paying for all this data to use that kind of against us as human beings. So social media is not really your friend, and especially in this era with all the economic cataclysm, where a lot of people are depending mainly on their social media for news. That's a recipe for the disaster, unless you are really willing to take the action to make the effort to go out there into sources that are far from your normal sources, to make sure that you can believe what you're reading and what you're viewing in these videos. We're actually entering a time where this is going to get quite dangerous because of the whole arrival of the deep fake, and the fact that, for example, major kind of somewhat trusted groups in government will end up resorting to things like deep fakes. It's astonishing that in our world, that kind of pursuit of non-truth can be officially, pursued by government and corporate entities. It's frightening. But it's up to us as individual citizens to be better informed. And that means to broaden our news sources and be very open-minded about this, and realize that people are trying to mislead you. And some of these groups are very nefarious at what they will try and do. And that is not your friend. To be led down a pathway of falsehood with lies and distortions that are intentionally diverting your knowledge away from facts, that is not your friend in helping you deal with this world. So it really is incumbent on all of us, until our governmental institutions can kind of regulate some form of policing of social media and news networks. We really need to take better care of this. One thing I do want to make very clear on this about the news is I believe that certain sources are far more trustworthy than others. I would not be putting the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and CBS in the same category, for example, as Fox News and Breitbart. I just want to make that part clear. But I have found that it is helpful to me to broaden my news sources and be very open-minded in the hopes of trying to get to some truth. And also, it's very instructive to see often how one side is distorting news. That reveals a lot about kind of their integrity or lack thereof, kind of a lot about how you can assume that, the long arc of justice, which is the way that humanity works. At the over months and years, I feel that true facts will end up ruling the day, and that people who are spreading the truth will end up writing the history for all of this world and not the people who are intentionally distorting it and leading us to a non-truth and to falsehood.
Now, for those of us who don't want to watch the news, because we don't trust any of it, and again, there's also, Dr. Bruce Lipton's coming on in July, and we're finally going to talk about. I'm finally going to talk about the biology of belief and epigenetics and quantum physics, because I have sort of rejected a lot of what some people want to call science, because you can't control how my individual body, how my consciousness is reacting to something versus somebody else. So there are some ways in which it didn't even matter. I went to Italy at the very beginning of this pandemic and had an amazing time and walked on water. I was in a frequency of untouchable, because I'm not in communication with this, and I have a healthy immune system, and I do all good things. I do things like the fasting mimicking diet. I'm on one right now to strengthen my immune system and create new stem cells. I have a low inflammatory diet. I exercise. I take my vitamins. I deal with my emotions. I don't let things fester. So on every level, mind, body, and spirit and soul, I am trying to be as clean and healthy and as high vibrating as I can all the time. So I don't want to watch the news. I don't want to do all that research. I know you're a Sag, I know you got an Aquarius moon. Like, you want to know the truth, and so you're looking for the truth, and that's like fun for you to be like looking for the truth and to see and to compare those numbers. But there's a lot of us, even though I'm right and left brain, a lot of right brainers who don't want it. Like, it's all bad. It's all bad. Like, even there's so much negative energy and fear infused within it that I don't even want to do that. So can we talk about, for those of us that want to contribute, it's not that I'm turning a blind eye, because trust me, being in the wellness and functional medicine scene for a long time, I mean, I have a truth that my intuition is screaming about, which isn't what most people think is the truth, because they're unwilling to believe the corruption that could happen, or where the politics lies within, let's say, pharmaceutical industry, or within tracking human beings. So it's a reality they don't want to think about because it feels bad. And I understand that, but I believe it is a truth. That doesn't mean I'm going to, again, focus on it and do everything I can to research it, because at the end of the day, I have to be in a place where I feel and trust that no matter what comes down the pipeline, that I'll be okay, I can handle it, and there will be a solution for me. But getting people to, again, detach a little bit emotionally. If you can research and look for information from a place of neutrality and not get so hyper upset, and that's where the difference is. I think for you as a researcher, as an educator, as a scientist, you're able to look at data from an observer perspective. But there are too many people that get too triggered and too in fear about their future or their own health by even going down that path. So for those people, what would you recommend in terms of them doing the best that they can? Again, I'm taking the broad perspective of, here we are, we are reincarnated beings, we are souls living a human experience, we're spiritual beings living a human experience. What do we do with those if some of us don't want to play in the muck of, I don't believe any of these numbers that you're talking about? Not you, but I mean, the society.
Your point is a good one, in that certainly if you get caught up into watching the news all the time to try and discern the truth and make sense of it for your own life, it can be a very toxic experience. I find, enough to be an informed citizen is certainly important. But for me, I find tremendous respite in my daily meditations. And not only do they help me in finding creativity and guidance, insight, a sense of connection with the souls of my soul group to serve as advisors and things like that, but it can be very kind of energizing and rejuvenating. And, just 20 minutes or so of meditation a day, I think, can be a tremendous gift. Once you realize the brain is not creating consciousness, but that in fact we're sharing consciousness, and that the brain serves more as a filter, and that we can, or a veil, and we can traverse that veil to get more out into the mental layer of the universe and into that God force, it can serve as a tremendous source of kind of energy and sanity in dealing with this world. So for your viewers who do not yet have a regular practice of meditation, I would advise, use the powerful tools available for free from Sacred Acoustics. Go to sacredacoustics.com. There's a 20-minute file that you can download for free. And then I would advise people to look at, on that website, sacredacoustics.com, Karen Newell has constructed a set of teaching videos, very short, 5 to 8 minutes, and maybe there's an hour and 20 minutes total, but they're very instructive of ways to use these tones to get into deep states of conscious awareness and of relaxation. In fact, in February of 2020, there was a pilot study published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases by Dr. Anna Newsom, a New York psychiatrist. And that pilot study looked at sacred acoustics and found that, in fact, over a 2-week study period, 26% of her patients had benefit from those sacred acoustics tones alone, compared to 9% who had benefit from standards psychotherapy, talk therapy alone. And that pilot study is well worth looking at. That's kind of an extraordinary level of relief of anxiety, depression, things like that, and help with problems like insomnia. And so it's something that's proven. We're in the process of coming up with some more expanded studies to look at all that. But the reality is, with a tool like that can bring you tremendous kind of relaxation and kind of peace and harmony just through going into a meditative state, I think we can all use that as a tremendous tool to help us in this world. As it is, our biological systems depend on, those 8 hours or so of sleep and dreaming that we're supposed to get every night. And it's crucial. Science does not yet understand why dreaming is so important. We know it's applicable not just in human beings, but going way down the evolutionary chain. There's something about spending some time where our mind is not locked into this physical world, but is actually roaming free in that world of dreams, which is in many ways overlaps, say, the world of near-death experiences, the world exposed to us through psychedelic drugs, although psychedelic drugs are not a replacement for NDEs, and I do not recommend the casual use of psychedelic drugs at all. And yet the scientific study of such drugs like psilocybin, LSD, DMT shows very clearly the brain is not creating these phenomenal experiences. It's one of the most amazing things. We talk about it in Living in a Mindful Universe. But just as the dream world, which is so important to us to even survive day to day, is important for reasons we don't really know. Likewise, meditation can be very, very helpful by allowing us to connect with our higher soul, leave that little voice of the ego and all of its petty little interests behind, and realize that is not who we are, and that is not who is driving our kind of evolutionist souls. There's a far grander aspect of ourselves that is growing up to this mission of coming to guide us through the COVID pandemic and the economic downturn, and help all of us to become better and more resilient souls here to help each other and help the world at large to become a far better place through an acknowledgement of that binding force of love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, and of course, gratitude, and when necessary, forgiveness. But meditation can be a very powerful tool once you realize that going within is actually going out into the universe. And that's what modern neuroscience tells us about meditation and of its potential power.
So everyone go to sacredacoustics.com. A lot of my community has the free one from the last 2 shows that you and I have done, and the 2 shows Karen and I did. So everyone knows about Sacred Acoustics. If they were to, especially during this time, would there be another place in terms of purchasing that they would go to next if they already have the free one, just in terms of addressing sort of the collective right now?
Well, of course, there's a tremendous amount available there on the Sacred Acoustic website. And in fact, Karen, a few months ago, in response to the COVID pandemic, there's a bundle there that's especially powerful. It's the one that was used in that pilot study that we talk about in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, published in February 2020 by Dr. Anna Newsom et al. And that's called the Whole Mind Bundle. And she has that for sale at a deep discount on sacredacoustics.com now. And not only that, but for those people who are in the midst of the COVID pandemic and the economic challenges and do not have the money, because so many people have no money nowadays, she's offering it for free to those, no questions asked. If that's your situation, Sacred Acoustics gives you that tool, the Whole Mind Bundle, which is every bit of the firepower that was involved in that Dr. Anna Newsom's pilot study published in February. So that is Karen's way of sharing with the world, for free if necessary. I mean, obviously, if people can pay, she would hope they would pay, because obviously we have to, sacred acoustics and my efforts have to keep going and plodding along. And so at some point we need to get financial compensation for some of this. But the reality is we'd give it all away if we possibly could, because we want to change the world for the better. And the world needs it right now. So it is time for all of us to start taking better care of ourselves. And I promise you, meditation can bring you tremendous peace and harmony, and a much grander vision of yourself as living to your purpose and the meaning in your life, even in the challenges of the pandemic and of the police violence and racial inequality and the problems we're facing there. Every bit of this is a soluble problem. Humans have gotten us into a lot of this mess. For certainly our response to the pandemic has to do with some frailties in our human and governmental systems, our medical systems. But we can all grow together and show strength by being here to take care of each other. And that really begins by taking care of ourselves. And that's where I would say that meditation and centering prayer can be such powerful adjuncts at helping us to deal with this world and to thrive in the face of adversity.
Let's talk about unitedhopeandhealing.com. What is that about? Because you had me put that on, and I want to know what that is.
United in Hope and Healing. This, all the best stuff I have to offer is really Karen's idea. I need to point out, she's the brains in this operation.
That happens in my relationship too. And then we do a lot of work together, and he'll say, "I'm just the face. JJ's the brains." So I understand.
Well, United in Hope and Healing was a brainchild that Karen came up with way back, actually before the pandemic really got going and before the forced closure. And she thought we needed to do an every other week webinar to help people and to do it for free, so we could get it out to everybody who was interested, and nobody would be at all limited by any kind of financial constraints. And she named it unitedinhopeandhealing.com. And it's basically a series of webinars. We have one coming up this week, which I guess is the 4th of June, and every other Thursday beyond that point. And we often have guests, and we've had some wonderful guests in past webinars. We had Dr. Anna Newsom actually on there discussing that pilot study. And of course, replays of all of these are available at unitedinhopeandhealing.com. I would highly encourage people to listen to the replays. Dr. Anna Newsom was on. We've had Dr. Larry Dossey and his wonderful wife, Barbara Dossey, and telling, beautiful stories of kind of hope and healing in the scientific world through prayer, and so much else that Dr. Dossey has helped us to gain. They were our guests, and now Dr. Larry Burke will be a guest this coming Thursday. He's an amazing. So we also had Dr. Pim van Lommel on. Many of you in the NDE community know him. He's the Dutch cardiologist who wrote the book Consciousness Beyond Life. He wrote the original Lancet article in 2001 in the medical journal about over 300 cardiac arrest patients in the Netherlands, many of whom, 18% of whom had near-death experiences. And then Dr. Larry Burke will be our guest this week. Dr. Burke wrote a beautiful book, Dreams That Can Save Your Life. And this is about specifically addresses breast cancer dreams in women that save their lives. And he has many stories to tell along those lines, but he expands it tremendously with his co-author about other diseases, other places where dreams, often with the messenger being a departed loved one, coming to deliver that message in a dream about needing the mammogram or going to the doctor, what have you. And dreams are a beautiful way of engaging kind of our deep unconscious and that primordial mind. Karen and I often talk about meditation and sacred acoustics for approaching that deeper knowledge of self and finding the tools and advisors and guidance to help us in living our lives. But there's no question that dreams in many ways can do a similar thing. And Larry Burke is a true expert on that. So I would highly encourage people to join us for unitedinhopeandhealing.com this coming Thursday for that live webinar, but also be sure to look at past episodes because I think they can be very instructive and helping people to deal with anxiety and a sense of helplessness and hopelessness in the face of this pandemic and the economic challenge. Because in fact, we are never powerless, and in fact, it is these apparent kind of darkness and hardship in life that can serve as these beautiful gifts, as that kind of gift of desperation.
And are the replays up somewhere to watch after they're done for people that are coming to this
find
after?
them at the unitedinhopeandhealing.com website. The replays are available, so there is access to all of it. And it's a very beautiful and comforting program that I'm so pleased that we can offer for free to people around the world, because there are thousands of people who are availing us of this free offer, and I think are benefiting from it. We're getting tremendous feedback from that audience.
Excellent. Well, we thank you for being able to do that. I know that your assistant had sent me a link to one of the live. I couldn't make the live, and then I was trying to figure out where to go to find it. And now I know it's unitedinhopeandhealing.com. So I'll make sure to check that out. And I'll put the link in the show notes as well for anyone who's listening to the podcast and you're not watching the video on YouTube, where I have the URL up in the box on the banner on the video. So it will, all the things we've talked about today that have links will be in the show notes. So make sure to check your more or see more on your podcast app to go down into the information and grab a link for something that you've heard that you want to check out a little further. Again, as always, I appreciate you being open to having this conversation again and to wanting to educate the world. And again, from another perspective, someone who while I told you from the very first time that I had met you, and obviously I had known your story, there's a deep knowing that I had always had about, again, life, death, what happens. But I hadn't experienced it. So who's going to listen to me? Well, some people listen to me, but obviously the credibility of having died and or kind of physically not being present in your body or not being present in your body, but by using your consciousness and acknowledging that it was everywhere and not just in your brain or in your head, and being able to come from that point of view validates a lot of people who secretly know it and believe it, but haven't experienced it. And again, I think that perspective is important right now to remember when we're when we're bombarded with looking at myopically what's going on from moment to moment. And I'm saying we shouldn't be looking at that. It's absolutely necessary, but to balance out, obviously, the broader perspective, which gives us information as to who we really are, what's really happening, what we're called to do, and how to connect with that to know what's right for us on an individual basis as to how to make the biggest contribution. And to come back to, like you said, the knowingness that if I'm working on me, and if I'm meditating, and if I'm expanding my consciousness, if I'm releasing any resistance that I have, if I'm emanating love in an energetic field big enough, large enough, I practice that will affect everybody else. And to come back to that is one of my roles, and the power that we all have in love to emanate wider, stronger, more powerfully. But it has to come from our own hearts, which have to be unblocked and released and trusting in that moment to allow that expansion and that energetic field to do what it can. And that's an empowering thing to remember. So unitedinhopeandhealing.com, check that out. We've got ebenalexander.com also. And of course, sacredacoustics.com, everyone. So check it all out. Dr. Alexander, thank you again for being on the show today. Thank you so much for all of your service.
Well, JJ, thanks so much for having me, and thank you for getting this word out to the world at large. I appreciate what you do.